Hey guys, what's up? This is Luke with Think Boxley coming at you today with a review of Resident Evil Revelations. Let's dive right in. So I've said it before and I'll say it again, I am tired of zombies. The Walking Dead have been thoroughly exhausted from their march through seemingly every shooter game to be produced in the last decade, and then some. They just aren't scary anymore. There's nothing new to be done with them, and no matter how many developers try, zombies just make a bad crutch to lean on when your game is in need of some gravity. The fact that Plants vs. Zombies exists as one of the better uses of the infected should give you an indication of just where they stand in the industry. Resident Evil Revelations doesn't really change that, instead it just sidesteps the issue entirely and breathes new life into the Resident Evil series without sacrificing the core of what has kept it running for so long. It's somewhat difficult to judge the graphics of a game in these particular circumstances. Resident Evil Revelations was originally released towards the end of 2012 exclusively for the Nintendo 3DS, and by that platform standards, the game looks phenomenal. The level of detail and visual fidelity is some of the best, if not the very best, the 3DS currently has to offer. However, what's impressive on a handheld device is not necessarily so amazing when blown up to 1080p and displayed on the big screen. Earlier this year, an enhanced port of Revelations was released for the Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, Wii U, and PC. While the graphics were overhauled effectively for these platforms, indications of the game's origin as a handheld title still remain. Light shining through a grate in the ceiling casts an eerie shadow on the floor, but there's no shadow cast on your character as you move through. Certain textures seem to have been missed in the conversion to high resolution. And while lip syncing is added where there was none on the 3DS bar cutscenes, it's clearly tacked on after the fact. However, that's not to say that Revelations is an ugly game. If anything, seeing just how easily it scales up to consoles proves how good the graphics are on the 3DS. But should you not have Nintendo's handheld to compare to, know that you're in for a fine graphical experience. Just be prepared to see some things along the way that would be considered oddly low detail for such a recent release. Resident Evil Revelations feels like an action movie of last decade, complete with a gymnastic gun-wielding heroine, her trusty sidekick who's equally as likable but just not quite as cool, a quieter, handsomer man who is said heroine's only real match, a duo of nerds for comic relief, and a few other folks whom you're never quite sure whether to trust right up until the climax when all is revealed, and quotes of old literature mixed in for no apparent reason. Can't forget those. Yes, it's all a bit cliche, but if it fits your style, they're wonderfully entertaining cliches. Though sometimes predictable, the storyline constantly remains just complex enough to keep you guessing and moving on to find the answers. It's all static characters here, but the lack of development is easily compensated for by slowly revealing the backstory of each one, so that as the player you come to know and care about the characters not because of how they grow, but because of what they've been through to bring them where they already are. All of it is a well-rounded, well-thought-out, and refreshing change from the norm for games of the shooter genre, while not being so different as to appeal to an entirely different crowd. Though that's not to say you won't enjoy Revelations if other Resident Evil games aren't really your thing. In a day and age where mindless shooters sell millions of copies and even certain other Resident Evil games aim for action over substance, Resident Evil Revelations is pleasantly thoughtful and intentional. You'll often find yourself wishing you could run faster, and that's a good thing. Although movement and activity is indeed restricted, the game's limitations are rarely frustrating, but rather create much of the action's intensity by forcing you to think before and while you act. Use of space is also very intelligent. Very few games can reuse the same areas 3 times in one storyline and give a continual sense of purpose to each one. The bulk of the game is directly connected and fully explorable at any point in time. Need health or ammo? Go on an expedition to find any you might have missed along the way. Without giving any spoilers, you not only feel somewhat trapped, but also that you're using every resource available to escape. Resident Evil Revelations isn't about the zombies. They're there, but the game consistently de-emphasizes them by simply putting them in your way to a much bigger objective than simply eliminating everything in sight. Half the time your enemies won't be former humans at all, but infected wolves, sea creatures, and even giant lizard frog things. None of them are especially frightening, but ammo is scarce enough and your health drops fast enough that you will tend to regard any danger with respect. Of course, no shooter would be complete without a multiplayer mode, which Revelations offers in a way just as unique as the rest of the game. What Raid Mode brings to the table is a 2-man co-op blast through certain areas from the campaign, but with some RPG mechanics mixed in for motivation. You and your partner will run into one area, gun down a bunch of enemies, go into the next area, and rinse and repeat. Rewards come in the form of experience points and virtual cash, which will score you new weapons, characters, and outfits. Games only last 5 to 10 minutes, so it's easy to get hooked into playing just one more round 4, 5, 6 times, but unfortunately Raid Mode's longevity is about as limited as the scope of its gameplay. While working with one person against AI is fun for a while, it will inevitably get old as the challenge of fighting a computer wanes. Resident Evil Revelations is a standout title both in its series and its genre. Although it takes place between Resident Evil 4 and 5, the game stands very well on its own and will draw in both new players with no prior Resident Evil experience and longtime series fans who enjoyed Revelations bookend games. Capcom has made a zombie game that isn't as dead as the zombie itself, and I applaud the greater emphasis on storytelling and exploration over huge action pieces and fear factor. From the perspective of someone who is mostly outside the series, Resident Evil Revelations is easily the best series title in the past decade, and perhaps also the best and most memorable third-person shooter of this console generation. It's highly replayable simply because it's just that good. And honestly, that's something I haven't felt about a game, at least a game that's not an RPG, in the last 10 years.
It's time you learned the truth, Miss Valentine.